Egoism, the practice of talking, thinking about oneself excessively because of an undue sense of self-importance. At one point in our lives, we have all demonstrated egotisticality, one way or another, mostly in forms of mediums presented such as fighting with siblings about who gets on video games. But this can also come across to even making personal decisions that benefit oneself but harming others in the process, to even purposefully harming others in order to feel good or accepted into a cultural norm. Now, not only do these mediums impact oneself as an individual, but they also impact everyone else, all across the environment and community. Now, these experiences can be continuously progressed through a variety of mediums that we face on a daily basis. However, one of the most influential forms of egotisticality that enormously prevails is unfortunately within economics. Many of you are familiar with the immorality of slavery in the past. To have something so terrible and horrific, all boiling down to increasing profits, to maximize profits, all boiling down to one singular concept, egoism, projects an unanswered question throughout all of history, one that connects societal topics to one another. And among these is quite obviously big business responsibility. Many can argue from this standpoint heavily in favor of big business limitation, as logically, egoism assimilates from the top line measurements. However, one must also understand the impacts of generosity and how that can cause amazing things to happen across societal standards. And this ultimately comes back to the question that we previously referenced before. At what point does egotisticality and or generosity prevail in economics? And if so, how and why? And from this, it is ultimately up to us and our leaders to make decisions on behalf of themselves, to ultimately propel societies forward. And because of this is why we all need to embrace generosity as a whole. From the poor and middle class all the way up to big businesses. And in more detail, and in more historical context, we come down to ancient Egypt in 1250 BC, as one of the most religiously iconic scenes is presented throughout. As Moses frees slaves in ancient Egypt, and then follows a mass exodus through the Red Sea. And although the legitimacy of the story is debatable, and although this may be fictitious or even real, the simple fact is that this story presents itself to have very generous ideals in religious leaders. And we find that the moral compass of the story is actually presented throughout later in history. During the Gilded Age of the United States in the late 1800s, as corporations are viewing down and viewing the poor as nothing but profitable assets willing to be conquered, Andrew Carnegie, one of the wealthiest members of society during this time period, he's donating over 90% of his profits to the middle and lower class. 90%. Imagine that. Imagine making millions of dollars and then donating it all to the middle and lower class. And throughout Carnegie's leadership, and throughout the ability and his freedom to spend money on how he chooses, that propels society forward to greater lengths. However, this can ultimately be turned around back with egoism prevailing, as one corporation might climb into top of power, but then not distribute wealth equally. And although having the ability to develop into this freedom-centric economy could work, and although it does sound appealing, and believe me, it definitely does, the reality simply doesn't support this. Let's take a look at about how we as a nation run our economy ourselves. Currently, in the global population, there are 218 million child laborers working for our products that we use on a daily basis. 218 million children working for our products. On top of that, there are 700 million people in extreme poverty, making less than $1.9 US a day. That's crazy. And all this while the United States has over 12 million millionaires in our nation alone. Imagine that. A dystopian society come true. A society in which we run off the backs of poor laborists, all in favor to boost our own ego and generosity. our own ego. And as we discuss our political situations which we're in right now on a national level, let us be reminded that ultimately our economy and everything that we evaluate as a nation comes from working down to the poor as we manipulate them constantly. And although some people could argue that it is of the origin of nations, that this is their problem, ultimately that $2 energy drink that we get every morning, that small snack that we get at the vending machine, that all adds up as we all manipulate the lower class under, all in fancy of our ego. Listen, there are countless stories of freedom-centric economies working in the past, but however, as more evidence comes in modern days, this simply cannot work. It simply can't. We can't have more people go and through under the bus while we raise ourselves and raise our own ego ideals. And with this being stated, and with manipulative ideas coming from the top line businesses, let us embrace generosity as a whole. Let us progress society through this one ideal that can help stop egoism in our tracks and help lift society to help possibly become that freedom-centric economy that we all want. And with generosity, anything is possible. And this is how we advance, not only as a nation, but as a global cooperative also.